Okay, the drive-through continues, or for those of you hearing this on YouTube, hello! Because so much is happening, we can't ignore things and just do the show as normal.
We used to do a late night drive-through. This is an early morning drive-through. If the people only knew, we are recording a segment while you are posting a previous segment, while a previous show that we have done is still being edited or post-produced for broadcast, and we don't know where we all are, but things are happening fast in this world.
Yes, and thank you to all the very, very patient guest artists, the dozens of them who have been putting up with the chaos the last few days. But Jim, where we last left it, because the first people that are going to hear this segment will be on YouTube, we're working on the drive-thru. This is going to be in the drive-thru, but on YouTube, everyone heard the breaking news audio, your review of the CM Punk press scrum audio from All Out, or After All Out, with Tony Khan next to him. We mentioned in that show, which no one's heard yet, that we had heard rumors of some sort of altercation, and we really didn't have too many details.
Melee was a phrase, a word that was used.
Pier 6 brawl would have been used at another time. Batten down the hatches.
If it had been in Memphis, Lance Russell would have called it a Donnybrook or a stem winder.
Well, there was a hell of a stem winder apparently in the back. And since we have finished recording the drive-thru, and since we have put up the audio of your review of the scrum, there's been so much that has happened that here we are breaking into the show with breaking news, and then we still have more shit. There's so much recording going on. I don't know what to do. That's it. That's all I have.
Well, let's get to it. So the press scrum that shook the nation, the scrum heard around the world, was followed apparently by CM Punk returning to his locker room. Whereupon, at some point soon thereafter, while, as you mentioned, Tony was still doing the scrum, one of the reporters in the room has released video of when they think the incident going on in the back became apparent because one of the security guys is seen dashing out of the room in a panic. But anyway, the EVPs, the executive vice presidents of All Elite Wrestling, took offense, even though none of their names were mentioned. However, as a group, I believe they were referred to as people that couldn't manage a target. But the Jackson Boys and Kenny Olivier, I believe the phrase was, stormed into CM Punk's locker room.
Now, to be fair, they've probably seen a lot of people in video games doing this kind of thing.
Well, yes. So that's a thing that they would think that that you would do in a video game. We'll talk about here in a minute whether you do it and what the implications are in a professional wrestling locker room. But anyway, and from that point, there are only a few facts that are not in dispute on either side's retelling of the tale. Apparently, those facts that are not in dispute are that CM Punk clocked Matt Jackson, punched him at least once, and then now I'm hearing possibly multiple times, and that Ace Steel got involved. Ace Steel, of course, working as a producer backstage in AEW, is also a friend of Punk's and his original trainer. Ace Steel apparently popped Nick Jackson with a chair, bit Kenny Omega, and pulled his hair at the same time. Or possibly at different times, but bit and pulled the hair of Harpo. And that's, besides the harp, that hair's his trademark. Now, nobody knows who threw the first punch, or whether, actually, probably Punk threw the first punch, but whether there was instigation or it came out of nowhere. Those sides differ on that. And apparently, we don't even know for sure that Ace Steel was in the locker room when the Elite stormed in, but his wife was, because his wife was caring for and watching Larry the dog, who apparently is innocent in all of this, and no charges have been pressed on Larry at this point. So that brings up to me an interesting question that if Ace Steel, because nobody actually said from the accounts I'm hearing that he was in the room, but he was involved shortly afterwards. Could he have been in the hallway, whatever the fuck? Does he hear his wife yell? Well, she wouldn't yell Ace. That's not her. Chris, help, whatever comes in. His wife, a dog, and his best friend are getting maligned by three guys that, well, let's face it, there's been ill will to begin with. What are you going to do, Brian? You're going to take a bite out of somebody or clock somebody with a chair, aren't you? I mean, we don't know what he saw when he came in the room.
Well, let's take a step back. We don't know. We don't know what he saw. We also don't know where he was, like you said. He may have been escorting Punk back to the room after the scrum. Because again, it just happened right after that, just minutes later. So he may have been in the room with everyone. We also don't know who else was in the room.
Well, and who is everyone? Yeah,
we also don't know who else was in the room. We're assuming it's just Punk, a dog, and Ace Steel's wife. Maybe Ace Steel too. Does Punk have any other friends in there? Are there any other wrestlers in there? Punk has been pretty helpful to some of the younger wrestlers. Is anyone hanging around? We don't know that. With Kenny and the Bucks coming in that room, I guess there were two options. One, did they calmly walk down the hall saying, you know what? Enough is enough. Let's sit down and let's hash this out. We'll straighten this all out.
This whole thing has gone too far. We're all we've got to rein ourselves in. We're adults here.
We're executives. We're making lots of money.
Graduates of major universities.
Did they walk down the hall like that? Or did they storm down the hall and go into the locker room of the biggest star in the company, 3-on-1, or 3-on-1 and a dog, or 3-on-1 and a dog and a woman? Again, we don't know what's going on in this room. Did the three of them go and surround him? Did they stand above him while he was sitting down? Was anything... there's so many details we don't know. The only thing that's kind of universally agreed upon is that Nick Jackson got knocked out. It's still kind of... I guess people are saying it is the chair, but is that confirmed? Because I also heard the chair gave him a black eye. What do you think happened with the chair?
I don't... Well, again, how did the chair come into play? Was the chair in the way of the skirmish and it was thrown and whacked the guy? Or did Ace Steel pick up a chair and perform the fucking Paul Bunyan shot to the face? Hey,
if something happened with Punk and Matt Jackson that led to Punk apparently taking a swing at him, we don't even know if he hit him or not. And I'm not saying Punk couldn't have hit him, but we just don't know. But
no, I think that's one of the things that everybody's agreeing on is that Punk punched him. The question was there instigation and or how many times and or etc.
So if Punk hit Matt Jackson and Nick and Kenny are still there, so it's now... I'm just trying to figure out how this all happens because it's still they have the numbers.
Well, obviously it wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be fair if they jumped in because then it'd be 3-on-1. So obviously they're going to stand there with their dicks in their hands and do nothing. Right?
Or you jump in and try to help your brother beat up the guy whose career you've been trying to sabotage for a fucking while.
That would be an option as well.
And all of a sudden you're hitting the head with a chair because you're assaulting someone. And the other thing, I'd hate to go off a little bit here, but everyone's talking about, everyone's clammed up on this because there are legal implications across the board. This is an assault in the back. But this isn't the only incident, but this is certainly the biggest public incident when it comes to the questionable behavior and decision-making of executive vice presidents in that company. Take out of the equation that it's Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, the wrestlers that you may not like their wrestling. Let's look at them as executive vice presidents in Tony Khan's company. This, a very public display here, this was what they thought was the good decision. Not to go and sit down with Tony and talk to Tony, not to wait until the next day. No, let's go have it out right now. They're not wrestlers doing that. They're executives in the company. That opens AEW up to a problem because one could argue what is bullying and what isn't bullying. You don't have to be the biggest, toughest guy to be a bully. There's other types. And if these guys who are executives, which makes them above all the wrestlers there, are exerting their power in this way, storming into Punk's locker room, causing a confrontation that wasn't going to happen, they're executives. They're not just wrestlers. They're executives of the company. At a minimum, before you even get to who gets what, they should be stripped of their executive titles immediately. Because this is public. There are other things that aren't public, but the behavior of the executives is certainly not the behavior of any executive in any successful company.
Well, and then also somebody's going to say, well, but Punk said that stuff at the scrum. Well, Punk's comments were in response to not only their good friend Hangnail actually on national television going into business for himself and trying to bury the guy, but Punk's belief that the EVPs themselves are the ones that have been spreading the whole Colt. Oh, he got Colt Cabana fired or tried to get Colt Cabana fired business. And that was obvious as well. So it's not like that he just blew up at the press scrum and had Tourette's all of a sudden and decided to just start this whole thing. But nevertheless, you also talk about executive vice presidents. This is why the number one, wrestling for 100 years didn't have executive vice presidents. Number two, why it never should have any that are active wrestlers, because, and as I can give you some examples here in a few minutes. People storming into other people's locker rooms in the wrestling business is not a new thing, and physical altercations resulting from same is not a new thing. But can you think of any time where an executive vice president of a company, publicly traded or not, in the modern history, has ever stormed in somewhere and gotten in a physical altercation, whether they instigated it physically or whether they just instigated it by walking into the fucking room? Can you old Chip Burnham in the TBS WCW days? I could see him kicking open the door and fucking snatching goddamn Gary Royal around the neck or something. No. They're executive vice presidents. What they should have done immediately, because the EVP thing kind of trumps being one of the boys. That's when now you're in office. You're office now. You're not one of the boys.
There's an issue with the balance of power in any situation like this because of the three executives standing over him.
That's what I'm saying. So they should have had the good sense, instead of going into Punk's locker room, and also, if they weren't smart enough to take a fucking witness on their side, and apparently they're not, because nobody's fucking making them look like angels in this. Everybody's shut up, which means there's fucking shit fault on all sides. But instead, they should have gone to Tony Khan. As soon as he walked out of that media scrum, they should have been standing there with their arms folded going, well, now, Tony, we're the vice presidents. Even if he's the world champion, what are you going to do about this shit? Because then, that not only are they covered as executive vice presidents, they've gone to the boss, but then later on, at a Denny's somewhere, they could have an issue that wouldn't have got quite so much attention. But nevertheless, I know that neither the Hardleys nor Olivier know anything really about the wrestling business and have no idea what the history of it is or what the meaning of things are. But when you fucking bust into somebody's locker room after an emotional incident like that, you might not be going to have a fight, but you have to be obviously aware that one may take place. And in most situations where somebody does bust into a locker room, something does fucking happen. So I don't know how that they thought that somehow they were going to go in there and fucking tongue lash a motherfucker to his face and or whatever else happened in that situation and something not happen. That's fucking insane. So apparently now, one report was that police were involved. And obviously, who the fuck did that? That's,
Well, to be fair, could they have been there as opposed to someone snitching on this incident?
Well, okay, but hopefully that may have been the case because they're in a fairly big building, and I'm sure there was a lot of yelling and shit going on. So maybe that was, and we haven't heard that any charges were pressed, but that would add an extra level of fucking heat. And that's the reason why that in the days of wrestling, when guys did get in fucking fights, and I mean, we've heard stories of, the hotel room where fucking Maivia tried to bite Robinson's face off and fucking severe assaults. Cops never heard about it because if you call the cops in those days, it would A, either make the papers, or B, just go to court. You're under oath and all these other things, and it might expose the business. So in those days, when guys got in a fight and they were in the same territory, they had three choices. One was get over it, fucking become friends again and move on, which some people did. Two was give your notice to leave the territory. Or three was get even some kind of way and then probably get fired. But those were your three options. Police were not a fucking option. And then if you've got a deal where some guy has to go to court for something, for fuck's sake, then he's really going to go back and kick some other motherfucker's ass or take a shot when he gets it. So that didn't happen in the old days, but this apparently attracted enough attention in the building because apparently there were, as we mentioned, only a couple people or a few people, small number in the room, and then everything happened. And apparently after the physical altercation, it went on for some time as everybody was pulled apart with fucking yelling and screaming and cussing. And one of the best things that ever happened to Twitter was when somebody's already tweeted this morning the picture of the Bucks sitting in chairs and then the Dark Side of the Ring logo, and say, I don't know, we busted in the locker room. The next thing I know, Matt's on the ground and Steele's eating Kenny. But anyway, so have you gotten any updates on anybody else claiming that they were there? I'm sure in a few years, 150, 200 wrestlers will claim that they were there. But have you heard anything updating the melee?
Well, what I could say is a couple things. One, again, we still don't know a lot of the details. AEW has instructed wrestlers, even if they weren't there, to not say anything about this. From the best of what we know, the Wrestling News can report there have been suspensions issued by AEW to personnel involved in this situation. That's all I could say about that right now, but there have been, at a minimum, suspensions issued from AEW itself to people involved in this. Whether those are paid or unpaid suspensions, we will find out, but we'll keep working on that story. I guess the big question is, and we'll talk a little bit more about another thing in a second, we're recording this on Tuesday. Tomorrow's Dynamite. We'll see who's there and who isn't there. But if you're Tony Khan, how do you handle this?
The wings may be spicy in Buffalo tomorrow. Honestly, no, we have not heard any indication that anybody has stormed out. I think probably they're going to wait and see how this is handled. I'm saying stormed out of the company. Obviously, they left the building in Chicago. Punk's a pro. I would think that he's willing to come and work and carry the company on his back and be the world champion. Possibly Tony might have to send the children home for a few weeks because they're the ones that came to where he was and in larger numbers than him. And obviously that wasn't, if you wanted to have a conversation about anything, that probably wasn't the time after a long show and tensions running high. And as a matter, Punk was still sitting there. He hadn't even had time to take a shower. He's still sitting there with blood on him from the match. So I assume that was the same thing. So, since Kenny and the Bucks were on early, they'd had time to shower and calm down and, be just chilling and relaxing.
Brush
since
their
they
hair.
were the second, brush their hair. They were the second match, one of the preliminaries. So they had plenty of time to compose themselves. Whereas this guy's been working hard, being the main event on $1 million house and shit.
But you're looking at it from one side, and that's the problem. What if, and you don't know what happens, you don't know what goes on in people's personal lives.
Play devil's advocate.
I'm playing devil's advocate. What if minutes before this, Kenny Omega broke up with the bird he was dating in the sim app he plays?
Well, now, then, of course, his emotions would have been running high as well. So, but In all seriousness, here's the thing. I keep, again, hearing this shit on Twitter, and people are saying, well, Punk always has a problem with everybody. Punk's apparently, to me, and that's kind of what got him over with me. I mean, I've never said he was goddamn second coming of Ricky Steamboat in the ring, but the guy's got a mind to be able to tell a story and he can talk. But what gets him over with me is he doesn't put up with bullshit and says what he thinks. And if he makes himself valuable to a place, then he expects to be rewarded for that, but he then follows through with what he says he's going to do. And he doesn't put up, like I said, with bullshit, and has, I think, over the last, what's it been since that interview that Paige did? Couple months. Before that, the Colt Cabana rumors have been going around for 3 or 4 months or whatever the case. And he finally, I've had all I can stand, can't stand no more. And that's why he addressed it. And that's why he addressed it at the press scrum, because the press are the ones that have been spreading all this shit, because all of the darling websites are in goddamn, you know, they're members of the Lollipop Guild. They belong to the Cucamonga Kids. And that's where he knew it was coming from. So he finally decided, all right, here we are. Let's just fucking bring us all out in the open. But so people saying Punk always has a problem with everything. Look back. How many problems have the supposed elite been in the middle of? Personal issues, that problems with the AEW. You know, sometimes I forget what's publicly known and sometimes I forget what's not.
You got to be a little careful here.
I don't want to. But we're getting a pretty good track record here, Brian, for people coming around and say, you know, they were saying that about a year and a half ago, and son of a bitch, wouldn't you know, so-and-so did get fucking run off, or so-and-so did leave, or so-and-so was accused, or whatever the case. I'm just saying, if you look at the interpersonal relationships of the AEW roster and problems amongst same, you get some member of the elite or their literal high school friends. No, I'm sorry, Cutlet was grade school friends involved in it, or them picking sides in it. And this is now starting to come out. Because once again, okay, I'll liken the analogy to Sonny and Sable. I said,
yeah, why wasn't he filming it? Where was Cutler with the camera?
Well, yeah, hold on. I said one time, I said, Sonny was an upfront. She was talented. She was good at what she did, but she was a bitch and you knew it, and she'd probably admit it and do it right in front of you. Whereas Sable was an undercover. She'd smiled everybody's face, especially people that were more important than you know, she was and could get her ahead somewhere. And then elsewise, she was a bitch. So I think CM Punk is the upfront. He may be a little assholeish sometimes, but he'll tell you why and he'll tell you who. Whereas the other ones, they like to run their little mealy butt munchers behind people's backs. And sometimes people have had all they can stands and they can't stands no more. But I think everybody should, when the story of all this is written, look at the locker room beefs and see who the common denominator is before CM Punk ever even got there. Who the common denominator is.
You know, Jim, and again, you brought up the Cabana thing earlier. Remember, if Cabana had been released with everyone else, Jelly Nutella and Marco Stunt and all those other people, that would have been it. It would have been gone. And I think that was the path he was on.
Well, that was the path, because remember that were they released or their contracts just expired and they hadn't used them in a while and they just went away? Well, that's what Cabana's contract was expiring. And that was Tony's passive-aggressive way to say sayonara. And then the Hardleys went in to bat for him and got him signed to a non-existent promotion, Ring of Honor.
Yeah. So a guy who's not generating any money for the company, who doesn't mean anything to the company in terms of ratings or drawing people or anything, someone who, even if you like him and you're a fan of his, someone who means nothing to the bottom line, whose contract was going to be a thing of the past and they can move on. We've seen what happened to other Dark Order members. All of a sudden, and what got in the Observer was that the Jacksons, I think Nick Jackson specifically, the knocked out Jackson, He went and got Colt Cabana a job with Ring of Honor. He got Tony to do that. And then the stories start coming out that CM Punk tried to cost Colt Cabana his job. And that's why CM Punk got mad about this whole thing.
That's basically it. And the kids started their whisper campaign and throwing tantrums, about something. Because here's the whole thing. They've been exposed. And they're jealous. We started this. It's ours where we can play with all of our friends and do our cosplay trampoline wrestling. We don't want real stars coming in, doing real matches, drawing real money. So that's why they created their little 6-man thing so they could all play together. And every time that it's come on for the past 3 weeks, 200,000 people have said, fuck it. We don't want to see this. And the pressure is on them because they're being seen through. And their friends are as unprofessional and mostly untalented. And in some cases, just blithering dipshits. And I'm sure the stress is there. But they accepted the job of being executive vice presidents. So therefore, you can't storm into the fucking boys' locker room and fucking tell them off for telling the truth in public. They've disqualified themselves from being able to do it. When you're one of the boys, you used to have that right. I don't know now anymore. They'd probably call the cops if somebody came in or whatever the fuck. But no, if you stormed into somebody's locker room in the old days, you assumed you were going there to either hear what you wanted to hear or fight. There wasn't really any backups to that.
In terms of Tony Khan, though, and putting yourself in Tony's position, and not to make any jokes about Tony, but legitimately putting you in Tony's position here, I guess you have to be angry at everyone to an extent, but there's different kinds of anger here. Ace Steel is one thing, CM Punk's one thing, but the anger with the executives who are representing your company, who there are other issues with, that's where it becomes another thing. So how do you think Tony deals with each individual party here? Or how should he?
I think, obviously, the executive vice president thing needs to go away because they're a legal liability now. Because if anything else happens where they are even remotely culpable in instigating it, now they've got a track record. And then whatever wrestler involved can just, okay, unsafe work environment. Remember that from Shawn Michaels in Hartford, Connecticut? And they can just sue Tony and get their money that they would be paid for wrestling and more without ever having to take a bump. So the executive vice president thing has to go away, and no active wrestler should be executive vice presidents in the company. It was bad enough when they were just a wrestler in a territory and being the booker with no contracts, nothing in writing, and the promoter could just fire him if he wanted to or whatever the fuck. But this is way too legally entangled now, and there's a lot of large sums of money going on. Who's Tony going to be mad at? Everybody, including himself. He was sitting next to the fucking guy for 20 minutes while he said these things. And he was nodding his head while Punk said them. So that either means that he agreed with it or he's just lost and didn't know how to tell his star, hey, give him the Iggy under the table. Or reach over and give him the office and go, hey, we'll talk about this later, Ixnay, whatever the fuck. But then, since he sat there and listened to that, I'm sure that he was not hearing. Does anybody out there think that Tony Khan was hearing those things from CM Punk for the very first time?
No way.
In public in a media scrum?
No way.
Of course not. So he's heard it before, and apparently he's not done anything to address it to anybody's satisfaction. So who should he be mad at? First, his executive vice presidents, regardless, for walking into the storming, walking, motivating into the locker room, 3-on-1, because that's the way that they were looking at it. They obviously didn't tell Punk, hey, go get 2 more guys. If there were some around, it wasn't their fault. So they go 3-on-1 to the guy's locker room. So the vice presidents, I'd be mad at them. I'd be mad at myself because I've been hearing this obviously for some time privately and haven't done anything about it.
Yeah, let me stop you there. Just because that's a big point. And I feel bad for Tony because of this whole situation, but Tony's also the blame for a large part of the situation. We've been talking here on this show for a very long time about internal problems, backstage problems. We were talking about them when they were a lot more benign. And a lot of those reasons they were benign is because Cody Rhodes dealt with things in a very different way. But these issues have been there from the beginning, and they've gotten worse. And we've talked about it. We've talked about the growing problems. We've said that someone needed to step in. We said there needed to be a better management structure. There needed to be a better way of doing all this. Tony has tried to do things. We've seen some of the hires, Sanjay Dutt and Pat Buck and Ace Steel. I mean, we'll see what happens there. But then we heard about this meeting. You know, we're talking about this, but this isn't the only AEW backstage drama. There's whatever's going on with Thunder Rosa. There's Eddie Kingston and Sammy Guevara. There's all sorts of shit. The shit that's not public. They had this meeting. Tony is animated, we heard, passionate about his company. It's his company.
Yeah.
If we take Chris Jericho at his word, and we'll play that audio on the drive-thru because we already recorded it, us reviewing him during the press scrum. Chris Jericho, who we may not see eye to eye with on everything, sounds like he stood up and he said, there are certain ways we should do things, certain things we shouldn't do. Maybe he should follow his own advice at times, but it sounded like he actually gave pretty sound advice. We heard Tony Schiavone stood up and it was rather nice. No one had a problem with it. Even the Young Bucks, even if you thought they were full of shit, which they usually are, come talk to us, our locker room's open. Omega got up there and turned it into a contentious thing. 8 out of 10 of them wouldn't be good enough to work for Kenny Omega. They don't work as hard as Kenny Omega.
Yeah, he actually said if it had been up to me, I wouldn't have hired 80% of you. That's like going back. Remember when Bischoff had the meeting and said the only people in the room that is drawing money is, who was it, Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, and there was Flair sitting there?
You know, we've talked about it, and I said it a few weeks ago, Omega's going to be the next one out the door. His behavior is going to become a big part of the story. It's been unreported. It's been ignored. And his behavior in that meeting didn't do anything to help any issues. It drove a bigger wedge in the issues. So we're coming out of that, and the next public thing we know about is him and the Bucks storming into CM Punk's dressing room. I understand a lot of people think CM Punk's a dick, and at times he could be a dick, and he'll probably tell you he's a dick at times. We all could be dicks. Some of us could be big dicks.
Quit bragging.
But that doesn't mean that he's necessarily wrong. And you may not conduct yourself the way CM Punk would or say the things he would, and I get that a lot, so I understand it. But that doesn't mean he's wrong, and he's voicing concerns for a lot of issues. Quite frankly, he's voicing it for a lot of wrestlers that don't have the voice and the platform that CM Punk has. Some people may get upset about it. Maybe Kevin Owens will put out a little cute tweet. But to some people, he is a locker room leader. And the way this all went down, to the people that are predisposed to love the Bucks and Omega and want to just believe that they're just wonderful people that love teddy bears and save old women from fires or whatever it is.
Sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows, waterfalls.
There's very little you could say. I mean, they like their guys. And I get it. You like your guys. There are people that, still like Woody Allen films. And people like their guys. However, their behavior, privately or not in the public domain, the stories, and now we hear about some of this stuff publicly, is the biggest part of the backstage problem in AEW. All Friends Wrestling was real, but after a while, there weren't really cliques of friends anymore. There was just one giant clique of friends. And if you weren't playing with them and their friends in their way, it was like you didn't exist. That's the reason the Codyverse happened. Because all of a sudden, he couldn't interact with any of them. Remember they had to have their faces blurred out of the Cody Rhodes reality show? So I think that's...
Well, in all fairness, I would have asked for that too, but I see where you're going.
Yeah, but I think that's the thing. CM Punk could be a jerk, and he could handle himself in ways that other people may not, but that doesn't mean he's wrong about all this.
And here's the thing, Cody also, you know what? Like you said, he's an executive. He's a professional. He wants to be on TV. He had bigger thoughts. He just, you know what? It's not worth fucking with these children. I'll just go over here and make my big splash and, say sayonara. But with Punk, he doesn't want, need, or have to go back to the WWE. And he's like, hey, I don't need to go any fucking where. Fuck you. And that's the difference, and that's why it's getting a little more public. Anyway,